Welcome to another episode of Mythic Drafting and a 10-part series where we're taking a look at how to draft each of the colour pairs in the upcoming set, March of the Machine. If you like this type of content, please be sure to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel below. We'll be releasing draft videos once the set is released on Arena, so be sure to check those out. But now let's get into how to draft green-white, and I always like to start at looking at the signpost uncommons to give me an idea of what green-white wants to be doing in the set. The first of which is Botanical Brawler, which is green and a white for a 0/0 Elemental Warrior with Trample, and it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on another permanent you control, if it's the first time +1/+1 counters have been put on that permanent this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Botanical Brawler. From this card, we can already see that green-white is going to care about +1/+1 counters, and that's because of the ability backup in this set, which is where a creature with backup enters the battlefield. It's able to put a +1/+1 counter on itself or any other creature, and if it puts it on another creature, it also gives them the abilities that that creature has. So green-white is going to have ways to put +1/+1 counters on it, and if this is effectively giving you an additional +1/+1 counter on a trample creature for every time you get to do this, I think this is going to be a really strong card and can quickly get out of hands and win games by itself. The next signpost uncommon is Invasion of Moag, which is 2 green and a white for a 5 defender counter battle. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. If you deal 5 damage to this, it flips into Bloom Wielded Dryads, which is a 3/3 Dryad with Ward 2, and at the beginning of your end step, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So you can already see that, say for example you manage to curve 1 drop into Botanical Brawler into a 3 drop, and then play Invasion of Moag, you're going to get a +1/+1 counter on all 3 creatures, and then you're going to get an additional 2 +1/+1 counters onto Botanical Brawler, which will make it a 5/5 trample on turn 4 that's threatening to flip the battle into the Bloom Wielded Dryads, which would then put another +1/+1 counter on a creature and on Botanical Brawler. Green-white's going to have some really aggressive curves, and while that's living the dream, I think that there are going to be situations that look similar to this, where these types of cards quickly combo to get out of control for your opponent. Some of the other powerful uncommons in green-white are cards that care about getting +1/+1 counters on them, or are just really efficient at taking advantage of the +1/+1 counters, and then other cards that put +1/+1 counters onto your other creatures. So the first card we're going to look at is Sunblessed Guardian, which is 1 and a white for a 2/2 human cleric, and then you can transform it, only activated as a sorcery for 5 and a red Phyrexian mana, into a 3/3 Phyrexian Cleric, and whenever it attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy on it, but you put a +1/+1 counter on that token for each +1/+1 counter on Furnace Blessed Conqueror. So effectively, you can play this in the early game, and then you can play backup creatures or other cards that give +1/+1 counters to make this into an efficient beater, and then in the late game, if that hasn't been enough, you flip this, and whenever it attacks, it's going to create another big, massive attacker as well. I think it's going to be foreseeable that this card could get 2 or 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and the flipped version will be attacking with 2 5/5s or 2 6/6s, which is going to be difficult to deal with. The next card is Streetwise Negotiator, which is 1 and a green for a 0/2 Cat Citizen with backup 1. And it has the ability, this creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So you can play this and put the +1/+1 counter on itself, and you've got a 1/3 that's going to deal damage as a 3/3, or you can put the 1/1 counter on a 1 drop and have that bash and deal damage, or just, for example, play this on turn 4 with another 2 drop and put the +1/+1 counter on something like Sunblessed Guardian. The next card is Cameo of Whispered Hopes, which is 2 and a green for a 1/1 spirit, and if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1/+1 counters +1 are put on that permanent instead. Then you can tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is Cameo of Whispered Hope power. So the Cameo is, I think, really strong in this deck in that it's going to double all of your backup abilities, and also if you ever just put 1 +1/+1 counter on this, it's going to get 2, it's going to be a 3/3, and it's going to tap to add 3 mana. So it's going to ramp you into dumping all of your creatures. It's going to make all of your backup creatures better. I think it's just a really strong card in this archetype. The next cards to look at are the backup commons. The first of which is Serpent Blade Assailant, which is 2 and a green for a 2/1 Death Touch with backup 1. So it can come in as a 3/2 Death Touch, or you can put the +1/+1 counter on something to make it bigger, and then still have a Death Touch 2/1, which is going to trade for your opponent's 3 mana, 4 mana, or 5 mana card. Now there is a bit of a risk with it only having 1 toughness, as there are some cards that deal 1 damage, so you've got to keep that in mind when choosing whether to put the counter on itself or one of your other creatures, but I think this is a pretty solid card. The next one is Chomping Kavu, which is 3 and a green for a 3/3 with backup 1, and then has the ability this creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So you can play this on turn 4 for a 4/4, which is difficult to block, or you can play it on turn 4, put the counter on one of your other creatures to buff it, make that tough to block and get some damage through, and then have a 3/3 which can't be blocked, double blocked by 2 2/2s, so your opponent's probably going to have to trade their 3 or 4 mana card for it. The next one is Bowler Slinger, which is 3 and a white for a 2/2 Cat Soldier with backup 1, and whenever this creature attacks, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls. Again, I think that you're probably going to be wanting to put the counter on another creature when you play this, so you can play it, buff one of your creatures, it attacks, taps down that blocker, you get damage through, and then the next turn you can use Bowler Slinger to tap another blocker down as well. But if you need to in a pinch, a 3/3 that taps an opponent's creature when it attacks is pretty good and a fine card. The next one is Golden Scale Aeronaut, which is 4 and a white for a Dwarf Pilot flying 2/3 with backup 1. So I think, again, this is a similar theme in that you're probably going to want to put the +1/+1 counter on another creature you control, give it flying to get some damage through, and then you're left with a 2/3 flyer on the other side. However, if you're paying 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer, that's also fine in a pinch. What I think I see with these cards is you really want to have multiples of them, and you really want to curve out with them, because effectively what you're going to be doing is playing one creature, and then playing a backup creature, putting the counter on the creature that can attack, and then you repeat, so that each of these creatures is getting the backup token from the next backup card you're playing, and then only the final creature doesn't have its own +1/+1 counter. This will allow you to chain all of their abilities as well, and is going to be really frustrating to deal with as an opponent, especially on the draw, as all of your creatures are likely going to be smaller than the creatures your opponent is attacking with. There are also some common cards that I think are really good cards to put +1/+1 counters on from the backup creatures. The first of which is Alabaster Host Sanctifier, which is 1 and a white for a 2/2 lifelink Phyrexian Cleric. And why this card is good is I think if you're just putting +1/+1 counters on a lifelink body, it's going to be really tough to race that, and your opponent's going to have to deal with it, as otherwise on turn 3 or 4 you're going to be gaining 4 life and dealing 4 damage. The next one is Tarkia Dune Shaper, which is 1 white for a 1/2 Dog Warrior. This is just a fine body to put +1/+1 counters on, and is going to enable you to curve out. And then if you have put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, it's going to be even more difficult to deal with when you flip it, because you can pay 4 and a green Phyrexian to transform it into Burnished Dune Stomper, which is a 4/3 trample Phyrexian Dog Warrior. So if you play this on turn 1, and then you've played maybe 1 or 2 backup creatures, this is going to be a 5/4 or a 6/5 trampler. It's going to be really difficult to deal with, and is a great place to dump +1/+1 counters on. Another great place to do that is Kithkin Billy Rider, which is 2 and a white for a 1/3 double strike Kithkin Knight. And this just means that you're going to get to take advantage of each of those +1/+1 counters twice, because Kithkin Knight will deal damage twice. And so if you get 2 counters on this, it's going to be a 3/5. It's going to be incredibly hard to block by most creatures. And especially if you can use that green uncommon that makes it deal damage with its toughness, the turn you attack after you back up with that, it's going to be very, very difficult for your opponent to stop. So what are some of the amazing rares in this set for green-white? The first one I want to look at is Boonbringer Valkyrie, which is 3 white for a flying first strike lifelink Angel Warrior with backup 1. This card's just amazing. You can just put the backup counter on itself for a huge 5/5 flyer, or you can use it to lift up one of your creatures that turn. They won't be able to block it. You're going to gain a ton of life through the air and deal a ton of damage, and this is just going to swing most races. Another card that will help in races is Doomskull Warrior, which is 2 green for a 4/3 Human Warrior with Trample and Backup 1, and the ability that it has or gives a creature it backs up is whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may reveal a creature or land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This card's really tough to deal with. It's going to absolutely escalate out of control of your opponent if you manage to hit with the creature this backs up. As let's say you deal 3 or 4 damage, you're looking at the top 3 or 4 cards. If there's another creature with backup in there, you're just going to be able to keep comboing these creatures out together. And then Doomskull Warrior itself is really tough to deal with, especially if you can then play another backup card to put more creatures counters on this to make it even bigger. The next card is Dusk Legion Duelist, which is 1 and a white for a Vigilance 2/2. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on it, draw a card, and this ability can only trigger once each turn. This card is the best card probably to put +1/+1 counters on. If you have this on turn 2 into a backup creature, it's going to be really tough to deal with. And if your opponent doesn't kill it and you can keep comboing backup creatures onto this, you're just going to absolutely spiral out of control for the opponent to deal with the card advantage and the threat that this thing is. There are also some absolutely bonkers rares in green-white, the first of which is Archangel Elspeth, which is 2 white for a Mythic Planeswalker, which has 4 loyalty counters on it. And it has the ability +1 to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink, then -2 to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types and gains flying. And then for -6, you return all non-land permanent cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Elspeth is obviously great in all white decks. However, there are some creatures that care about +1/+1 counters being put on them, and so that's what makes Archangel Elspeth particularly fun in green-white. A card that is only going to be good in green-white most likely is Gulta and Marvin, which is 3 green-white for a legendary creature, Dinosaur Vampire, which is a 12/12 trample, and whenever you attack, choose one. Create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures, or create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is the number of other attacking creatures. This card is only going to be playable in green-white really. It's just an absolute game winner if you manage to cast it on turn 7, because you don't have to wait for it to attack, it's just whenever you attack. And so, if you've played out a couple of creatures and backed up all your counters onto one creature, you're going to get a pretty big dinosaur token. And then if they manage to deal with that creature and you have a few bodies lying over, you can just create the vampire creature tokens with lifelink to make sure you survive the next turn so that you can attack with your huge trample 12/12 to win the game. I think this card is just really good. You may want to first pick it, however it's probably more likely that you'll end up in green-white, and then if this is opened in pack 2 or 3, it's going to come to you if you're the only green-white drafter, as it's really hard to splash, and I don't think it's the kind of card that you're going to be pivoting into in pack 2 or 3. So that's it for green-white, and let's take a look at the overall game plan. I think it's pretty clear that backup is the main theme here, and for that to work best, you want early creatures and you need to have a good curve. You want to be curving out and chaining your backup creatures into each other to put a lot of pressure on your opponent. You also want to be looking out for creatures that take advantage of the +1/+1 counters, such as the Double Strike Knight we took a look at. Finally, I think you just want to have a look at ways to push through damage, as green-white doesn't have a lot of flyers, and any removal spells or just pump spells that give trample, for example, are going to be really strong in this type of deck. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content. We'll be putting out draft videos as soon as the set is released on Arena. And leave a comment below about what cards you're looking forward to drafting in green-white.